Let's get into it.
Let's go.
Welcome to Nobody's Muses, episode 2. And we are discussing the first 2 episodes of Daisy Jones and the Six. So if you haven't watched those 2 episodes, spoiler alert, we will do our best not to talk about the things that we know that happened from the book. So just watch out, though. But this is first 2 episodes, so don't listen if you haven't watched both of those.
Yeah. And I'm really like, I'm trying to separate, again, working on that, separating the book from the show itself, which is somewhat easy because like I can't remember a lot of what I listened to the first time I listened through the book. So it's easy for me to forget.
It's
So it is like watching it with fresh eyeballs because I forget.
It's easy for me to forget lots
The
of
joys
things.
of 50 something.
Yes, exactly.
All right, well,
So,
we're back. It's
yep,
Rachel and Crystal here again. That was fun last week when we
it
did
was,
this. I'm excited that we're doing it.
yeah, I'm really excited.
And here we are again, ready to go. Um, so let's go.
So the title of this one is called Track 1, Come and Get It, which I'm thinking it's referring to the If You Want It, Here It Is, Come and Get It by Badfinger, I believe is
Sure.
so, and the cold open sets up where you have all these people are setting up for the interview. So this is set, and this is the 1997. So you see
Right.
Billy sitting down, and he doesn't look like he wants to do it. Graham is, ready to go. Eddie looks kind of hesitant. Karen is testing the mic, and of course Warren is this thing on. And also, really, I think it's really funny because they kind of set up the personalities of each of the people just in those first shots.
Yeah. And
And
this is where we see one of those big differences because the book indicated that it was a lot further along in their lives than what the episodes are showing. So
yes,
because again, you couldn't get that big of an age gap and make
right.
it work and believable with the characters. So we have a smaller gap in time.
Mm-hmm.
The interviews are set like in 1997ish. So we're setting them down and getting ready to talk to them.
Yeah,
And Billy
and
is super uncomfortable.
yes. And I would just say, like, whenever in 1977 I was 6, and so I was probably really into Star Wars. And in 1997 I was 20 years later I was working, and I think we were pretty close to, maybe close to you getting married.
I was married. Yeah, we got
You're
married. I
married.
was 26 when we got married.
Yep. Okay.
So
Just,
yeah,
I
we
don't
were
know. I was just
married.
thinking about,
We
like,
were, we were married and starting our careers.
yeah, in
Um,
1997 we were yeah, we thought we were so grown up.
we were grown up. We were college graduates. We were out on our own.
Yeah, we'd realized adulting is not fun.
No
That you get
bills.
2 weeks vacation. There's no breaks.
No, there's no breaks. There's bills. You've got to buy tires for your cars.
Yeah, so
The reality. Oh, and student loans.
yeah,
We had student
exactly.
loans. So,
So
but anyway, we see him sitting down and testing the mics and kind of getting ready to start the conversation.
yeah, and Billy says, "How long is this going to take?" And then we go into the title comes up, and it says, on October 4th, 1977, Daisy Jones and the Six performed to a sold-out crowd at Soldier Field in Chicago, Illinois. They were one of the biggest bands in the world at the time, fresh off their award-winning multi-platinum selling album Aurora. It would be their final performance. In the 20 years since, members of the band and their inner circle have refused to speak on the record about what happened.
The
And
montage of photos that they used, I thought were really, really good. I thought to me, they invoked emotion before the show ever got started. Even if you've never read the book, to me, that series of photos that they showed evoked a lot of emotion. You saw where it ultimately ended up of Billy walking off stage and leaving Daisy there by herself.
yeah,
So to
I
me,
don't
those were good selections.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I had a little bit of the feeling of like, you know how in movie trailers they show all the good parts and the funny parts. And I
Uh-huh.
was like, I'm like, I don't know if I want to know this much information just by these photos. Now, maybe because I've read the book and I know how things are going to happen, maybe it's not as obvious to people who haven't read the book. I'd be interested to hear from people, and you can email us at nobodysmuses@gmail.com if you have any thoughts on that. But I felt like it was, I don't know, it made me a little nervous because I'm like, I don't know if I want to know this yet. I want to go through the experience. But
I get it.
I thought it is interesting, and I think that's something that we will look back on later about this as we get to know the characters.
Yeah.
And so we go to back to them getting ready in 1997 for their interview. And the big part is, so Billy says, so Daisy also agreed to this. And then another title comes up and says, until now. And then you see Daisy, and she doesn't say anything. She just smiles. And I think they really do set up already the characters. And I wanted to mention Graham, the brother, being, just tell me when you're ready, and him being very sweet to the interviewer, and
Hmm.
everybody kind of having different ideas about how they were gonna how they're interacting with the interviewer. And so we go to until now, and then we go, Daisy is looking awesome. I think she looks really great in the 1997 version of herself. And then
Yes.
we cut straight to the open uses Patti Smith's "Dancing Barefoot" as their music,
So
and
what do
some.
you think about this song
Well,
being used here?
I I would say I was surprised that they didn't use something from the album from Aurora, from the music they created. I think that that's interesting, but I think I mean, the song is the lyrics to that song, and I'm gonna have to go, and I want to do a breakdown of the song lyrics with the images that we see in the open. But I think just looking at the lyrics, I do think that there is I mean, if you look at the lyrics, it's like, she is a benediction, she is addicted to thee, she is the root connection. So I think this is a lot. It actually is very appropriate. And as we go through
Mhm.
this story, I think it's going to really show that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely was setting a stage to the importance of Daisy's character throughout the entire series, which of course we know that her character is important because it's Daisy Jones and the Six.
Yes.
But, I think there's something to be said about that choice of that song and her importance throughout the series. And again, you know, she is a benediction. The lyrics kind of, we've heard a different version of this song, the original Patti Smith singing it, but U2 also did a version of this.
Right.
And so as you hear Bono singing these lyrics about she is, I could also hear, you know, in my mind, Billy thinking she is this, she is
Yeah.
this, and all of these things that kind of connect their relationship to each other.
I mean, it says he is levitating with she, you know, it is about a person maybe taking someone somewhere they don't want to go. Not necessarily bad, but a place that they don't want to go.
Yeah. Out
So,
of their comfort zone.
yeah, yeah. So I think, yeah. So we go into that, and then we go back and we see them once again in 1997. And the interviewer asked Daisy, "When did you first fall in love with music?" And then we go straight cut to her being a little girl, just an adorable little girl, singing, just singing her heart out with her little vinyl record. And
And
she,
and
go ahead.
a song that most 6-year-olds probably would not have known at that time.
No, well, I don't know it now.
I
I mean, so
mean, but if you think about it, Yeah,
Exactly.
it probably wasn't a song that many 6-year-olds had the 45 playing on their little record player. So I
Yeah.
think that tells us something about where she is already when it comes to that connection to music.
Yes.
So then I'd be curious as to know like who gave her that connection to music, because her parents are so disconnected from her.
Right. Very cold. And I think it's interesting to me that I don't think the dad has a single word of dialogue so far.
Not so far.
He's just standing there. So, and she's singing Alone, All Alone I Sit. It's by Violet Hall. And her mom comes in and tells her to be quiet and says, "No one wants to hear you." And what a cruel thing to say. I think we set up real quickly what kind of mom.
Yeah. Yeah. In the book, it explains that her dad's a painter. Her
Mhm.
mom is a model.
Yes.
Um, Children were just Daisy as a child or Margaret as a child was just decoration for them.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we set up from the beginning, Daisy is looking for something and she's not finding it in the places that she anticipated it or could have expected it to be.
Right.
So we start out with not finding that support, not finding that love, not finding that voice through her parents. So there's one relationship down that's not playing out how you would expect it to play out.
Right. And then we cut to well, we have the guy who plays a music critic, and I kind of like that they have this guy in here because it doesn't give it that behind the music feel. And he basically sums it up that she was born in privilege and, had all of there's no reason why she shouldn't be successful. But what does that mean? Kind
Right.
of. And then we cut to the Whiskey A Go Go and that scene where she stands outside the whiskey and talks to the roadie and asks for a cigarette. That's straight from the book.
Well, first I want to sit back to the line that she has, and maybe it's in the book where she talks about, yeah, it is in the book where she is standing in front of the mirror, kind of examining herself, and it's the whole they think you look older if you don't have a bra on.
Yes, yes, yeah, that's
Like,
definitely
they think you're older if you don't have a bra on.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, again, where do we get that mindset
I
that
don't know.
she's supposed to be around 14 at this time? I think is what
Yes,
is what we expect her to be. But yeah, she shows up at the whiskey, asks for a cigarette, because who hasn't experienced in their life that they think smoking a cigarette makes them look cooler? Um, and so she just kind of happens into the go-go. It's not like she even went in with somebody else.
no,
She saw an open door and she walked her ass right through it
right.
and headed on in.
And I mean, I appreciate that they didn't just go with like the typical song is Strawberry Alarm Clock, which is not the most that band is not the most known of the 60s bands. I appreciated they didn't do like, your typical like basically from the soundtrack of Forrest Gump anytime you talk about the 60s.
Yeah.
So and then when she's there, she sees the birds are playing,
Mm-hmm.
which, I think is still in some ways a very underrated band, even though they weren't around for that long. And they're singing Going Back, which is, if I'm looking up,
It's a great song, but it's not one
and
that we
I
think about when
believe,
we think about the
yes,
birds.
no, it's not their cover of, and I believe it's a Goffin King song. We might have to edit this out because I want to make sure I'm right. Um, yes, it's a Jerry Goffin Carole King song. So
It
they're,
is.
yes,
I did not know that.
yes. So that's important.
It
They
is.
are doing some important things here. I mean, as we go forward, that's something to note about what they're choosing to use as the back. I do feel like they put a lot of thought into what they're using in the background and the lyrics of those songs, and I think we might have to just do a whole deep dive on that in a later episode.
Well, and that kind of a note that I have further down in there. We know that we have Aurora available to you wherever you stream your music. They have released an LP of Aurora, multiple versions of it that you could order off of Amazon. So you can get collector's edition, you can get a translucent, you can get a regular old LP. So we have an LP of Aurora. We need to have all the other music,
Yes.
not just the music that like, Patti Smith or, T-Rex or whatever
Hmm.
those artists that we hear in. I need that music, and I need the songs that weren't on Aurora that Daisy sings or Simone
Yeah.
sings.
Yeah.
We need a Daisy Jones album, not just an Aurora album.
Yeah.
I might just have to make the playlist myself,
Yeah.
but yeah, we need that. We need the other music on there as well. But we can do a deep dive into that for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. So then we are in Pittsburgh now, where the actor Dan Rowe is young Billy, and he's in a listening booth at a guitar store, at a record store. It really reminds me of a couple of scenes in That Thing You Do,
Yeah.
where they're in a record store, and he says there was the mill in the war, and that's kind of all you had.
Well, and one of the things, it's really hard. Like, I've tried to go back to my book and kind of find these scenes in the book to compare them. And it's hard because you're actually in two different chapters, because you
Hmm.
kind of have a chapter that really goes through Daisy and where she was and how she evolves. And then you go into a chapter that's all about the Dunn brothers and how they grow and how they evolve. So trying to flip back and forth between two chapters
Yeah.
to connect and see, where things were in the book versus where they are in the show, it's a little bit of challenge. But I think we can, I think anybody can relate to the idea of knowing that, if you grew up in a small town, you got to, there's a
Yeah.
lot of times where or a lot of instances where we can see in those small town experiences, even though it sounds like it's a suburb of Pittsburgh, you got two choices. You either go out
Yeah.
through the war, you leave this town through the war, or you stay here and you work in the mill.
Yeah.
And there's still that experience for a lot of kids today.
Yeah.
you know
And and especially at that moment, because it wasn't like now where you can volunteer. You get drafted.
yep, if you didn't volunteer, you had a high likelihood of getting drafted
Yeah.
in the height of
So
the Vietnam War. Yeah.
and I think he's a great actor. I love this I love the young Billy. I think he
Yeah.
is very I think he's really good. We see him, he's got groceries and he goes home and he's like, "Where's Graham?" And his mom's like, "Oh, he's still upstairs." And he's upset over a girl.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think, well, like what the age gap is between those. I think Graham was supposed to be about 14. So I'm going to say that Billy was like 18
Yeah, I'm
probably at
thinking
this
like
point. So like a 4-year gap.
I'm thinking that it was kind of like Graham is the freshman, or maybe and Billy's like the junior or senior, and whenever your siblings, like, they might as well be an adult when it's just 2 years difference. So that's kind of how I kind
You
of
saw
picture
it.
them. So it seems like, oh, you're just my little brother. It's just 2 years, but yeah. And especially as we move forward, so we'll go to it. So Warren is like, it was Graham's idea to start the band, and they show the four of his buddies, very young, the three of his buddies, Graham and his three buddies, and they're like, like, Graham's like, let's start a band. They're in their PE uniforms, and they don't really want to do it until they say, oh, but my Billy's going to be in it, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
And here's one of those glaring differences
Yep.
that, even though, we're trying to separate and watch this through different eye, here is a glaring episode because we are missing a character.
Yes.
Okay. So we have Pete.
Yes.
Yes, we have Pete, who's completely non-existent.
Yes.
Which I'm like, he played a part through all of this.
Yes.
And I don't know why they cut him out.
I don't either, because I feel like it also added a nice little kind of perspective on it. His character of, to me, he's kind of like the Bill Wyman of this band. Like, Bill Wyman, the bass player for the Stones, was kind of just the guy who was there,
Yeah.
Like there's very little drama. He got along with people, and then, he retired before the rest of them because he's like, I'm tired. And I feel like Pete was a really grounding presence for the show, for the band. And I do think it's a weird choice, and it's like, especially because the name Daisy Jones and the Six doesn't make as much sense.
No. And we'll talk about that later. But
Yeah.
yeah, um I think it was a character that should have been left as is.
Yes. Yes.
Because I think although, like you said, they're kind of an agreeable, get along kind of character, I still think that they had that Pete had a place that was important to the story.
Yes.
I think he had a place
And
that was important to the
and I
story.
think we can talk about it later, because I think what he shows is a different road than a lot of the other people in this story take.
Yes,
So
agreed.
we go, and then and this is something they do a lot in the book, where it's Billy's like, "Oh, I never said I'd be in the band." But it's, he says that in his 1997 self. But then when they show it, it's really obvious that um he wanted to be in the band. And I think one of the big lines is they show them and they're not playing very well, and Billy takes over and is like, you're playing too loud, this isn't jazz, you guys got to do better. And then Eddie says by the second practice he was basically in the band, and by the third it was his band. That fucking guy. So we're setting up Eddie.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. We're setting up a history there with Eddie and
yeah.
Billy.
Yes, which is very typical of lots of bands. You go back to the Beatles. John felt like that was his band. And whenever they broke up, he's like, you can't break up the Beatles. That's my band. Whenever Paul left, and it's the same way with the Police. Stuart Copeland is like, no, the Police are my band. So I think that draws on a lot of bands, kind of that idea of like, whose band is it?
Right. And there has to be you have to have a leader somewhere along the lines. You've got to have somebody, even in a collaborative relationship, somebody has to take the lead.
Yeah.
And I think Billy had the ego to be willing to take the lead. He didn't want to seem like it. I think he wanted to play the aw shucks kind of,
Mm-hmm.
older brother. I'm not really into this for all these little kids, but I think he was looking for this outlet because, again, it's the mill or the war. And
Yes.
he didn't want either one of those. He wanted something different. So this was his opportunity to step into something different and create a new path for himself.
Yeah.
So
There now, let's go back. We're interchanging here between and I think it is interesting, and to me it's a very obvious of notes and how TV has to be different than books, because there's no way we could have done a whole episode, which we do in the chapters. Like the first chapter is all Daisy, and then the next chapter is all Billy and the Dunn brothers. You would not be able to do. You can't do that in TV.
yeah.
Like you're like, we're going to have them all. So that's why we kind of cut between. And I do think it kind of hurts it, in the sense that I do think it's kind of a little disjointed, but it works well enough. So
Yeah.
we cut back to um Daisy, and this line is really kind of does crack me up, because it's very it reminds me a lot of the Dewey Cox. It's it's like, what a time to be alive if you love music. And there's some line in Dewey Cox where she says something, it's a very special time if you love music, or something like that. That cracks me up. But um so she's loving
Every
music.
generation can say that. What a
Yes.
time to be alive if you love music. Every
uh,
generation can say that. And
yeah.
for Daisy, that point in her life, but think about, where she was at this point. She was probably 15, you know, we know what music was like for us. And I
Yes.
know that there are humans in this world that music does not speak to them the same way music speaks to other people. I don't understand those people. But there is something to be said for what music, when you have somebody who is a music enthusiast, who is very passionate about music, being 15 years old and thinking that this is the greatest point of musical history. I think we probably all sat there at one point in our lives.
Well, also, I think that as much as we maybe as Gen Xers in the shadow of boomers get tired of hearing how great the 60s were, um, this is the high point for rock and roll. You know, I mean, there's other great there's other great peaks in it, but you just think about the things
This is
that
rock and roll.
yes, they make it,
That's rock and roll. That
they
time
take
period.
it from Chuck Berry to this thing that is ubiquitous, to almost to the point where in the 70s it becomes corporate, and then we have to have a reaction to it. So, it is, that point. And I would say for me personally, as much as I like the current music of when we were growing up, I was incredibly like the Beatles were I love the
You
Beatles.
were way more into 60s music when we were in high school, because that's, we should say,
Yeah,
Crystal and I not only went to college together, and that's where we really came into our friendship. We also went to a very small high school
yeah.
outside of Fort Worth, Texas. Um, that was a very small town at that time. And if you, it's Crystal and I were not in the A crowd. I will say that. We were not the cheerleaders.
No,
We were not the popular cool kids.
no.
We laugh about the Venn diagram of our friendship.
Yeah,
But so for even, I mean, Crystal, we had similar friends in high school. We
right.
were not directly connected to each other, but even what I knew of you then, I knew that your musical taste definitely harkened in the 60s period more than it did in the current day stuff.
Yeah, I liked you too, and I liked REM, and I liked to listen to that stuff, but what I was passionate about was any British, British wave, Beatles, Rolling Stones, The Who, that's what I was into. And then later it became like just my progression was very much that same thing where later then it was like, oh, I really like Led Zeppelin and Sabbath, as I grew older, my
Mm-hmm.
my musical tastes. But I want to go on a tangent and we might edit this out, but I want to ask you, when did you know that you loved music? And how did you like when did that become important to you?
So music has always, I don't remember a time in my life when there was not music. So I grew up the youngest of three girls. My mom played piano. Um, and I can vividly see us on a random Saturday frequently. Mom would get on the piano and one of us would sit down next to her on the bench or be standing next to her if there was somebody already on the bench. And we would flip through the multitude of songbooks that she had, and we would start playing music. And it may have been anything from show tunes um, to, at that point in time, current pop rock hits, in the throughout the 70s into the early 80s. Music was always a thing in our household. And I had, like you, I had older sister. You had one older sister and one older brother. I have two older sisters. So I, got into music through a lot of what my older sisters were listening to. Um, and what like my oldest sister's boyfriend was listening to, because there would be days where like they might pick me up from school or something like that, and there was some kind of something in the 8-track. So that's where I started hearing bands like Fleetwood Mac, REO Speedwagon, Boston, Triumph, all of these great 70s. I listened to the Rocky Horror Picture Show soundtrack for the first time on 8-track. So, it was a lot of that, but I just always remember music. It's just always been a part of my life. I don't know how to play an instrument. Played piano for a little while, but I mean, we lived out in the country. You couldn't, it was a hassle to get music lessons going. Studied voice in high school, sang in high school, in, musical theater or in church, and danced from the time I was about 12 until I was about 22. So music was just always, a part of me,
Yeah.
always has and always been. And,
Yeah.
I've passed, I feel like I've passed that along to my kids
Uh,
because
Obviously, one
they're,
of them.
they're always, they listen to a ton of music. I think, my youngest has the musical ADHD that I have, that he listens to just about everything. They listen to stuff that their dad listens to, which is, metal music, but then they'll also listen to, show tunes, or they'll listen to, stuff that I've introduced them to, or some country, so they're kind of all over the place like me. But yeah, I don't remember a time where music wasn't a part of my life. What
Yeah.
about you?
Well, because I don't, it's church. For me, it's church. Like I grew up Baptist church, and I grew up singing in church, very much so. And that's really my parents' music, like they had like some Chris Christopherson albums and like a Charlie Rich album, but what they really cared about musically was singing in church. And my parents used to sing duets, and then growing up I was in choir in church, and so that and I took piano, I and so that was always the big part of it for me. And then same as you being a youngest, we have the benefit of having, I think, better taste in music usually because our older siblings kind of get us into it earlier. And my sister had especially one boyfriend in high school that was, he would like DJ the school dances, and we thought he was so cool because he had a jam box with an 8-track player, and he had really good taste in music, which my sister did not. So
Yeah.
so like his taste in music, like that's what I can remember, being, this was like 1981, and him telling my brother, "Oh, there's this band REM." And I remember us hearing Radio Free Europe on the radio and going, "Oh, that's that band Bob was talking about," like so. And I've always been an old soul, so I think that that's why, there's certain moments for me, like it's really dumb, but the reason I really fell in love with the Beatles is I remember watching Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and they have that whole sequence where he does Twist and Shout, and I was like, "Oh, that's a Beatles song. That's a really good song." And then I started going through my head of all the songs that I love by the Beatles. I'm like, "Oh, they're my favorite band." Like, when you put it all together, I was like, "Oh, that's kind of dumb, but like that's really." So for me, that's kind of where, and just, yeah, growing up, and just, me and my sister would get 45s at the JCPenney. We were really into disco and
Mm-hmm.
practicing the disco moves. And then when
Yes.
my sister realized, she told her friends that, and they looked at her, and then she stopped doing it because she got too old.
Oh, I can't tell you how
It
many
was a very frozen moment.
how
Like, you're
many
not going to
dance
dance with
numbers
me?
yeah, how many dance numbers I choreographed to before I ever started taking dance. How many
Yeah.
dance numbers I choreographed to a multitude of songs. The Grease soundtrack, which I probably had no business listening to as an elementary age kid, but
No.
I did. And me and my neighbor friends, we had multiple finely choreographed dance routines to a lot of those songs. A lot of those songs. And see, and this is, you and I could probably spend an entire episode just talking about songs from our life,
Right.
and where, because that's just it. And that to me is like, I jokingly say I don't understand people who, like, you ask them what their favorite band is and they're like, I don't really have a favorite band. How could you not have a favorite band? I don't understand you. And so for us who are that passionate about music, I think we can go back and, Daisy's picking these moments in her, we're seeing
Hmm.
these moments in her life where she's falling in love with music. We could probably go back over the story of our own lives and pick songs and pull songs out of points of our lives. And I'm going to tell you, for me personally, there are some songs I immediately evoke emotions in me that a lot of people might not understand.
Yeah. So back to Daisy Jones and the Six. She's back there, she's living life in the 60s, and she's 15, and she says, I was 15 years old, and the world seemed just so beautiful and good. And then we see a scene where she is raped. She goes back to a hotel room, and an older guy who's got like the
he had a Jim Morrison look about him, which I didn't really.
He had the Jim Morrison leather pants.
I didn't really care for the fact that I didn't like that they put, not saying that Jim Morrison was a perfect human being and that this probably did happen at some points in his life, but I don't understand why we had to connect a very obviously stylized character to this moment in her life. Because in the book, it's a random drummer from a band.
Yeah.
It's not anything like what we saw in the episode. And I had a problem with that. I didn't like the fact that they stylized the character to look so obviously like Jim Morrison.
Well, and
because I mean, the long and the short of it is, whether you stylized it to look like Jim Morrison or it was some random guy in a band that played drums, the fact of the matter remains the same. Daisy was raped.
Yes, and I have mixed feelings about it, because in the book, I guess in the book, I feel like, it's the whole idea of this unreliable narrator, and she's telling us what she wants to say. So she kind of like, no big deal. Like, oh, I just laid there until he got done.
Yeah, the book kind of blew it off.
And which, so many of my girlfriends have stories that are like that, where they convince themselves that they weren't raped, and they 100% were. So it felt real. And then she does say, I was a baby.
Yeah. People want to say I was naive. I wasn't, I was a baby. And she was.
Yeah.
She was.
I think that if you go into this, you look at it now, like things like that, of course, of guys having sex with 15-year-olds was so normalized. I mean, like, if you read Pam DeBar's I'm with the Band, it's kind of gross. Like when you read about Jimmy Page and how he really liked 15 and 16-year-old girls, and it was just normalized. And I do appreciate the fact that now we're like, ooh, that's icky,
But I think if this had been, I mean, this was supposedly, when she's saying this, it's 1997.
Yes.
In 1997, I don't think we would have said, ooh, this is icky either.
No, we wouldn't have.
I think we would have still, in 1997, been like, oh, she was a groupie.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Not the fact that she was 14 or 15 years old. Well, oh, she was a groupie.
No, the fact that we used to couch it and just call it date raped instead of, no, you're straight up raped. If someone forces you to have sex against your will, you're raped.
Yeah.
So she uses that moment to, and this is completely different from the book. In the book, she's known as Daisy through the whole thing. She goes back to the house, and in her diary, she opens up a new diary and she changes her name to Daisy. Mm-hmm. So it's a moment of it's transformative. This thing that happens to her, she's going to change it by she's changing her name. So then cut back to the adult Dunn brothers are at a party, and they are in matching turtlenecks. And what I'm trying to figure out about this is, by this time we're at, it's 1970. So we're well past like the matching suits phase of, the British pop wave.
Are we that far along, do you think?
Well, it says it has the date 1970.
Oh, it did? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. But again, they're in Pittsburgh. So are they really?
Oh, that's true. That's true.
What's the How I Met Your Mother, the episode of Robin Sparkles, where they're like, why do you dress like the 80s? It was 1993. Well, the 80s didn't get to Canada until the 90s.
Well,
maybe it's kind of like that. Pittsburgh, they didn't get out of that phase in Pittsburgh they were delayed a couple of years because they weren't on the coast.
Well, like, let's face it, like the 70s lasted farther into the 80s than everyone wants to think. Like, you look at things from like 80, 81, and it's still very 70s. So
Oh yeah.
he says, they play a song and he says, "Oh, we're the Dunn brothers." And then Eddie chimes in. He's
For
setting
now.
these things up for now.
For
And
now.
yeah. And they, at this point, this is just fun. This is something fun for them to do. It's a hobby. And Warren says that, yeah, the band was a distraction. And then we have a scene where they're playing a wedding and they see their dad and he's with a much younger woman.
But
And
again, I
they,
go back to, do you think it was just fun for Billy? Or again, was he trying to find his different path from the war or the mill?
well,
Because
I
maybe
feel
for
like,
Warren and all of them, it was still, for I think all the time Warren thought the band was fun. But, you know, for Billy, I think he was getting more serious about it, maybe faster than the rest of the guys were.
well, I mean, I think that they point out in this scene, he sees this, and a thing that maybe in the back of his mind was like, oh, maybe I could be a musician, becomes, I'm going to do this, because when he sees his dad and confronts his dad, he says, it's actually, he says, that's when he says, we're going to be a band. He says, I love you. We're going to be the biggest fucking band in the world. That's when he says it.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think was a little kernel of an idea of, maybe I want to do this. This becomes the driving force behind it. And what I do like about the scene is that there's some choices that they make. They make the choice where Billy busts up the guitar that his dad gave him. Because he's like, do you recognize? He's like, yeah, I recognize that guitar. He didn't say, I recognize you. I recognize the guitar. Because you can take this guitar. And he's like, oh, well, no, I gave it to you. And Billy, bashes the hell out of it. And then Graham is the one who punches him, though.
Yeah. Because Graham was 4 when he left. So
Uh,
Graham
and
honestly has
Graham,
no memory of who his dad was.
yes, but also I think that it sets up the relationship of Graham, who Graham is in relationship to Billy. And I mean, and in the books, it's a little even more strong, because maybe Graham isn't as good a guitar player. And they talk about, the other guys are like, maybe we should get somebody else. And Billy's like, sets them straight.
Yeah.
That's not happening.
Because
So
first
then,
and foremost, that's my brother.
yeah. So then we cut back to Daisy's doing drugs. Daisy's writing. She says, um, writing is better than drugs. Like, it's like I found a piece of me that was missing.
I
Um,
love that line.
yeah, and it was a place for her to escape. Um, I feel like the scene of her doing drugs, it was just kind of funny because they really linger on her smoking pot, like, so bad, but not really on the part where, like, she's snorting heroin, like where she's snorting
Snorting
drugs.
coke or
I mean,
popping
I feel like
rando pills.
I feel like you kind of build that a different way. You start with the pot, as they
Yeah.
called it, the gateway drug, which now it's basically legal across many places. Then you show it a different way. So I thought that was an interesting choice.
Yeah.
But you know, I think that she then she's writing, and she catches her mom in her room, and her mom's reading her diary, and her mom is so dismissive, and because she goes, well, what did you think? And she's like, you're pretty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I do feel like my relationship with my mom is not like that, but I do feel like that I had friends in my life whose moms were so worried about them looking pretty and being pretty.
Yes.
And I would say a good chunk of those girls had eating disorders as we grew older.
Uh-huh.
Um, and
Or tended to be more promiscuous
yeah,
at a younger age.
and I think that there is something to, you know, that approval from your parents, and if
Yeah.
you don't get it, where are you seeking it?
Yeah. Well, because I made a note about, like, for her at that point in her life, the ability for her to be able to write lyrics was like the absolute pinnacle for her. Like, nothing gets better than this. There's no better feeling. yet she's even saying that in comparison to the drugs, because she was already using. We see the scene where she's snorting stuff. We see her popping pills. We see her smoking a joint. And so she's already using, and she's already getting those chemical highs, or those, hallucinogenic highs. But she still comes back and says, that it's like you found a piece of yourself that was missing. Like, for her, the writing part was, at that point in her life, was her pinnacle. And she was finding so much out of that. It's like, okay, well, the drugs at that point were kind of, I don't know. They made it seem kind of peripheral for her, but I don't know.
Well, and I do think they also show her success, a successive group of different men that she's with too. They're not showing her actually having sex, but like, she's getting her dopamine hits where she can get them, whether it's through drugs or through sex, whatever she can.
Yeah. But I do think, to your point, there's the fact that her mom was so dismissive. I think no matter what kind of relationship we have with our parents, there is always a part of you, especially at that age, that's going to look for either some kind of approval or some simple acknowledgement of your existence. Because again, Daisy's parents, Daisy was ornamental for them. They were not interested in being parents. She was just ornamental decoration. And so she couldn't even get their, barely could get their acknowledgement of her existence.
Yes.
We can look at it and see there's no way they're going to give her any kind of encouragement about her writing skills. But for her at that age, she was hoping that her parents would tell her great job, which is totally appropriate for that age.
And we are, you and I are lucky that we had, as good, really, I mean, I think very good relationship with our parents who did acknowledge and encourage us, and so but I do have friends in my lives who, even though they don't have a good relationship with their parents, still want something.
Sure.
You can't help it.
No, you can't. It's ingrained. It's genetic. I think it's biological. You want the people that gave you life, you want them to acknowledge.
Yes.
And
you want them to know you. You need them to know you, because probably evolutionary wise, we needed them to know us so they would protect us so we could live.
Yeah.
So we cut back to Pittsburgh, and we have Billy meets Camila in the laundromat.
Yes. Big change from the book.
Yes.
Big change from the book.
In the book, he meets her at a wedding.
Yeah. Where she's waiting. She's a waitress, right?
Yeah, and she knows that he's in a band because he's playing. But I thought it worked.
It worked. It worked. There was some cliche-ness about it, but it worked. I mean, he makes this assumption that she knows who he's Billy Dunn from the Dunn brothers in Pittsburgh. How could you not know who I am?
And I love that she nags him. It's like, oh, I don't know. And then we cut to 1997 Camila, and she's like, oh, I knew who he was.
I knew who he was.
Yeah.
But you don't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing. Yeah,
exactly.
You know who
and
he is.
I mean, and she's already setting the terms like there, of what that relationship should be like.
Yeah. So, and the whole conversation about, give me your number and I'll write you a song. She's, does that line actually ever work on anybody? And he's like, well, I don't know. Give me your number and we'll find out, because you're the first person I've tried that with. I mean, that was a cute exchange. I liked it. It worked.
Yeah.
It told the story.
And then we go back to they're setting stuff up, and this is all this stuff with Eddie is different than from the book. So we set it up, and Eddie knew Camila. He knew her he would walk her home from church.
Yeah. Very different from the book.
And then we have like a little montage of time passing, and they're practicing, the band's getting better and better, taking it more seriously. But we already see Billy drinking in this whole sequence. And Warren's like, if my hands were raw and red, I was happy, because that means they'd been practicing. And then we cut to a scene of Billy meeting the family, and typical kind of around the table, and Billy's a musician, and the dad not being too into it and the mom just kind of trying to be supportive.
Right. Which is
And
different from the scene in the book too.
yeah. Um,
But yeah, it's the typical thing that you would expect to see of a dad not wanting his daughter to get.
I mean, I do like the fact that they just lean into that she's Hispanic.
Mhm.
I like that. And that, and kind of show a Hispanic family in the 60s in Pittsburgh, well, or early 70s. You don't see that a lot. So that
Nope.
was cool.
Yep.
Um, and then we have the whole scene where suddenly I blank on his name, but the one guy
Chuck.
decides, Chuck. Chuck decides that
He's going to go to college.
he's going to go to college. He wants to be a dentist.
Very different from the book.
Yes.
So let's talk about that a little bit. And I know we're trying to kind of keep those two separate, but I think it
Yeah.
brings about a point. And I actually went out and looked for this, and why was this done? And I
I,
I think they missed the boat on this.
I do too.
I think for the time period it was in, um, writing Chuck's character the way they wrote it, they missed the boat on this one. Even though what happens, and we can do this
That's
without
in the book.
spoiling anything, with even with what ultimately ends up happening, it is just kind of a passing comment or passing paragraph in the book itself. They don't dive a whole lot of time into that, but it's still acknowledged, and I still think it's appropriate for the time period that they were in.
Mhm.
And so, but everything that I've read about it said that they just didn't want to have that as part of the movie or part of the series. They wanted to, there was enough heavy stuff going on. They didn't want to add that to it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
good. So Chuck,
yeah,
in this Chuck, he in
Chuck
this
goes
multiverse,
off to be
Chuck's
a
a
very,
dentist.
Chuck's a dentist. Chuck goes off to be a very happy dentist.
And the key thing though is here, which is different from the book too, is Billy makes Eddie play bass. And I think that's a huge thing and a good way to have it like conflict because
Again, yeah.
so
But developing this conflict between these three
yes,
characters, ultimately, I would say the
yeah,
conflict and the struggle between the three characters of
yes,
Camilla, Billy,
and Eddie.
and Eddie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So then we cut to Daisy singing in the shower, and she's singing Linda Ronstadt's "Beat of a Different Drum,"
I love that
which
song.
I just want to point out, written by Michael Nesmith of the Monkees. So
Oh,
just,
look at you.
well, I mean, he's yes, another one of my obsessions is the Monkees
Yes.
and Michael Nesmith. So she's singing that, and I would also say I think that's an important comparison because there was this era of women like Linda Ronstadt, Emmylou Harris, who weren't necessarily writing music, but were interpreters of music in the same way that women singers in the 40s and 50s were interpreters of jazz standards. These were women interpreting um, music kind of in their own way. And, Linda Ronstadt is really important to rock and roll, not just on her own as a musician and vocalist, but because her backing band eventually became the Eagles. So
Mm-hmm.
this is, and in, the book, Daisy is kind of her first album, I think is very much like kind of like what Linda Ronstadt did because they have her do a bunch of covers.
Yeah.
So I like how they're setting that up.
And
And so,
again, for people that aren't into music, like you and I are into music, hopefully you're learning some things because not everybody is going to pay that close attention to know that, you know,
yeah, but I think
there's this deeper connection.
Taylor Jenkins Reid knows it. And
Yes.
I'm going to take a line from one of my favorite shows at this point right now is The Last of Us, and there's a wonderful episode where it's one of the greatest television episodes ever. One of the characters says, "Paying attention is how we show we care, and paying attention is how we show love." And I feel like this is what I expect from things that I love, and I want them to be paying attention. So the times on this show where I feel like they're paying attention, that makes me feel warm. And so that choice of Linda Ronstadt and her just happening, and they have to pay for that. I mean, these are choices that cost money for TV shows. So her singing that little line maybe cost them $20,000. I don't even know how long. I mean, it's so expensive to license music. So
Mm-hmm.
so she's in the shower, and then Wyatt Stone hears her singing, and he's looking at her diary
And
and
going through her personal
going
stuff,
through and like, ugh. Look,
intruding into her space.
let me tell you, I pretty much broke up with a guy, a boyfriend, because he kept going into my purse. That was one of the things that set me off. So to see him just looking at her diary, that made me so angry. And then he decides that he's going
He
to write
interprets
this
the
song.
song.
Yeah,
Well,
and
he
he's like,
interprets the song.
let me sing this. She's just going to go crazy over this. And she's like, that's not how I wanted it.
Nope. Nope. He tried to put his own interpretation on it without ever talking to her because he was intruding into her space
Yes.
and didn't even bother to talk to her about it before he just decided how he was going to interpret the song and how he was going to arrange the
Mm-hmm.
song and just
And
takes it
then
on.
and then 1997, Daisy says, I thought so little of myself that I just gave it to him. She didn't even fight for it. And she does say, stumbled on sublime until you can't speak. So the lyrics, I think, are talking about she hasn't found her voice, and then she basically says it.
Yeah.
And then she
Because at
says,
this point, she doesn't consider herself a singer yet.
mm-mm,
She can sing, but she doesn't consider herself a singer.
no.
She's writing down these random things and she has a melody in her brain, but she doesn't consider herself a musician or a singer yet. So she does not have that confidence in herself. So she did just kind of let him take it.
Yeah. And then the next thing she says in that same 1997 moment is, thank God I met Simone. And then we cut to they're at a party, like it looks like an industry party, and Daisy,
Somehow Daisy's gotten herself into it.
yeah, of
Don't know
course,
how.
and
She doesn't know anybody yet.
and I love this choice, and it's so interesting to me. She's going on and on about the swimmer, which
I had to
is
go back and look up that movie.
it
Burt
is
Lancaster.
It's a Burt Lancaster movie. It's based on I believe John Cheever short story, and it's about a middle-aged man who, at the beginning of the movie, he has decided, we don't know when this happens. We walk in and he's like, I've decided that I'm going to swim basically across the neighborhood. I'm going to swim across town, and I'm going to do it by swimming in people's backyards. And then it's basically a little vignette every different pool that he goes to.
It's so random.
Um, it's really an amazing movie because it is all about being middle class. It's a lot about class, and it's a lot about what it means to age. And it was one of Burt Lancaster's incredibly progressive. Read Burt Lancaster's biography. He was a true mensch, good guy, and this was a movie that he wanted to make, and it is I mean, there's some messed up stuff that happens in it, but it is really powerful. And I do believe there's a pool. That's one thing I think and then this idea of, in a lot of ways, the world of the swimmer is the world that Daisy Jones lived with her parents.
So, okay, so explain that.
Because her parents were these cold, upper middle class people. And that kind of, a lot of the swimmer is about that.
Okay.
Cold, upper middle class in California. It's about money and how do you define yourself when you don't have money? What are the your choices as in that idea of, because all John Cheever stuff is always about like kind of that malaise of the middle class, and
Okay.
especially of the middle-aged white man. And it's so she to cut to that, and then at that moment she's with Simone. There's a reason that they chose that, because that's not in the book. They could have put any line of dialogue there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that idea of, then she meets Simone, who is completely not of that world.
Of
So
that, yeah.
of that middle class white wasp, rich, like upper middle class world, like of a world where people have pools in their backyard,
Right.
where all your friends have pools in their backyard, so you can be like, hey, can I come by and swim? And it's a movie worth watching because it has a lot to say about that and about class. So then we get to Simone.
So again, we
And
have this intentionality
mhm,
with some of the choices that they're
yeah,
making.
exactly. I mean, which that's the table stakes. You got to do those things for me to want to watch you as a TV show.
Mhm.
So then we've got we meet Simone and we meet the woman that she's singing backup for, Penny Richardson. And
So who do you think that Penny
obviously,
was supposed to be based off of?
oh, I can't remember. I think it's because they also have a character kind of like that in Grace of My Heart. And I think it might be Connie Francis, but there was
Okay.
a person who had like
Yes.
a lot of hits in and they were basically closeted.
Yes. Okay.
And I can't remember. And but there is a well-known, and I think it might be Connie Francis, but it was kind of a like a pop star of that time. And then that they were closeted.
I do remember that from that character in Grace of My Heart for sure. And yeah, that was always kind of that Dorothy Day, Connie Francis kind of girly singer of the 50s. Yeah, I see that. Okay. I was
Yeah,
just curious who
so
you thought.
I
So
mean, it
yeah,
looked
you could see that there was something because again, there was this conflict of these two
Leslie
characters.
Gore. Thank you. I knew Leslie
Leslie
Gore.
Gore. There you go. Good
And
job.
yeah, I just had to look it up. And she did "It's My Party" and Judy's Turn to Cry and You Don't Own Me.
Yeah.
And it's not obvious. I don't think, I'm not trying to out her, but that's kind of a character like that was also in Grace of My Heart.
Yeah. Same
So
kind of vibe.
yeah, yeah.
Same kind of
So
vibe.
anyway, so we see, and so I mean, as far as I remember, and I have listened up to as far as the show has gone, re-listened to the book. We though is Simone isn't gay in the
No.
okay. That's what I thought.
No. We don't get that we don't get that implicate I don't get that implication in the book that she's gay
Hmm.
at all.
Right.
So this is something that they added that I think, based on the time, um, not 1997, but based on releasing it today, I think again, we've seen them trying to diversify the cast as much as they possibly could.
Yeah.
So here's where they took some creative leeway
Yeah.
and diversified the cast even further by
Yeah.
making it, which is fine.
Yeah.
It doesn't change. I mean, it doesn't, I think, it improves it, but I think it improves her character. And again, we get some more depth. And in turn, I think this is giving more depth to her and Daisy's relationship.
Yes. I mean, in the book, I think there's a reason why I like the choices that they make about her relationship, and there's things that I don't like about it. Because in the book, Simone is like 19 and Daisy's like 15 or 16, and like Simone basically becomes her replacement parent. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I went to her graduation. I told her she had to go to school. We don't have any of that in the book, in the show, which I'm okay with that, because I feel like too often there's these the black characters are cast as these wise people, or so I'm glad that we don't have that. So, but I also did like the fact that Simone was this kind of parental figure that she didn't have, and that's why there was a closeness to them. But they go to they hit it off. They're talking, and she's like, "Oh, you're just too good of a singer to be hanging with Penny Richardson." But then when Penny Richardson walks up, she's like, "Oh, hi, I love your music," which I think is hilarious. I like that line. And then and Simone does have a record deal, and then they go to her house
Mm-hmm.
and they're listening to Tapestry, and guess what song they're listening to? They're listening to Going Back,
Yep.
her version of it on Tapestry.
Which that album
Yes.
Again, I despite being, I mean, that I don't even know how to say it. Despite being that album came out when we were so incredibly young. I'm trying to even think when Tapestry was
I
released.
think it was like 71
Yeah.
or
So we were,
70.
I was thinking 71 or 72.
Mm-hmm.
That album, I can't even, the CD, I can't tell you how many times I like that was on constant loop for me in college. Constant loop for me in college.
Yeah.
71, released in 71.
Yeah.
Constant loop for me in college. Obsessed with that. Because I also had a period of my life where, again, this strong love for Fleetwood Mac, but there's also James Taylor,
Mm-hmm.
Carly Simon,
Yep.
Carole King, those three musicians, um, equally as obsessed with, equally as obsessed with.
Well, and I think, the thing is going back, like going back, haha, is that you think of, if you look at the lyrics, I think I'm going back to the thing I learned so well in my youth. I think I'm returning to all those days when I was young enough to know the truth. So this choice is also because I could have chose any song. This isn't in the book. They chose this song because it's a meta. We are talking about Daisy, 1997 Daisy going back, and then this
Mhm.
song is about going back too. So it's this, and it's interesting because like Carole King wrote that she was probably in her 20s, you know, when she wrote it originally. So it's just that idea, I think, of they're choosing these songs with very important like lyrics to make it, because they didn't choose the song that she talks about in the book, which is You've Got a Friend, which
Right.
that scene in the book to me is such a great scene because they look over to each other and they're singing along and they're basically singing it to each other, and it's kind of like, I don't know. I think sometimes in friendships you have moments that it's almost like a wedding where you kind of say vows to each other, like we're going to be friends forever. And that's what it is for them in the book.
Well, and
So,
sometimes we have lyrics that speak when we can't find the words.
right, right. So,
We have songs that speak everything that we wish we could put into words and we can't.
yeah,
And in the book, Simone looks at her and says, "Me too."
me too.
She doesn't even have to say anything. We're singing the lyrics. She doesn't even have to say anything. Simone gets what she's trying to tell her, and she says, "Me too." One of the things that I thought as they were in that scene, um, was that the part where Daisy was like, "I'm not a singer."
Yes.
She asked her if she was a singer, and she said, "I'm not a singer."
And Simone says, well, some girls are there for the music, and some are just groupies, and what are you doing in the crowd? I see
When
you.
you,
You're something more. There's
yeah,
something more to you. And what do you want to be? What are you going to
and this
do?
is the first person that's given her permission to do
Yes.
this. That's
And
told
who
her,
and
"You
she
can do
says
this."
and she specifically says, I see you.
Mhm.
Where her mom told her no one wants to hear you.
Yeah, but somebody, and we've already had, you know, um, Wyatt taking her voice
Mm-hmm.
and claiming it as his own. Her mother telling her, "Oh, you're pretty.
Yep.
That's good. You're pretty. Good thing you're pretty."
Yep.
You know, and now we finally have someone who is telling her, "You have something. You have a voice. It's good. It says important things.
Yep.
Now you just need to know that you can get up there and do it."
Right. Wow. So we got to go faster.
I know, right?
Okay. So now we cut to and we're at the winner's gig. And I think pointing out as they're walking in, Camila is holding onto Eddie's arm. And for a second, I got confused because I was like, wait, have they changed the cast again? But then she hugs Billy. So there's already like these little things happening, which none of that's in the book. So
Yeah.
And then at that gig, we see the beautiful Karen, and Graham is in love with her at first sight. And
So a couple of things
yes.
I found after we've taped the first episode. Um, Suki Waterhouse has been dating for the last 5 years Robert Pattinson from
Mm,
Twilight.
mm,
So now we have two people that are a part of Book World franchise that have very, very committed fans.
yeah.
Now, Daisy Jones is one song stand or one book standalone, and then we have the Twilight series, which Robert Pattinson was involved in. But there's still this deep connection with fandom, and we've got two people here who are connected to books that have very, very strong fandoms within the book world. So I just thought that was very interesting.
That is.
So that was just something. The other thing that I noted when we talked about this, so Karen in the book was not British. She was just another American girl playing the keyboards, but they made her British in the movie or in the series. So is it that Suki auditioned and they were like, "Oh, Suki's great. We're just going to do that," or was this maybe a tip of the hat to Chrissy McVie? That's what I wondered after I watched it.
Oh, I'd like to think it is, but I just think that, like, just think how many
They just found the
times.
actress.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they just always, and I mean, I'm glad they didn't try to make her do an American accent, because like,
we always
sometimes,
know
because I'm
they
like,
break
sometimes can
through.
we just hire an American? Come on, you can't tell me, you
The
know.
British that breaks through with
I
their
mean,
British
I mean,
accent.
I mean, of course, I know they hate when Americans do British accents, but I just sometimes go, come on, really? I mean, it's like Hugh Laurie as House, he does a perfect American accent, and also in Veep. And then I would say, so I'm just glad they had her be British, and so we didn't have to like deal with that.
Fight with the
Yeah.
slip ups. Yeah.
So then,
But anyway,
so they're at the winners gig, and they're opening, and Graham tries to get Karen to, he tries kind of hit on her. Nothing really comes with that. She's not interested. And then we enter Tim Oliphant as Rod, and with just a terrible wig. I think we already talked about it.
we did.
And then 1997, he has a slightly better wig and like a very like kind of scarf that was very Steven Tyler-esque,
Tyler-esque, yes.
like, and then but and honestly really captures, I feel like, the 1997 older rock person quite
Mm-hmm.
well. And then he says, you see lots of bands, but Billy is a rock star. And I do think they did a good job with the performance. I forget, they're singing one of their songs, and it does a good job of like kind of showing his charisma.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're back, and then we have Tim Oliphant. They're all like listening to him, taking his advice, and he says, and Billy's like, "Oh, I'm trying to write this song," and because Rod says you've got to write your own stuff, and he's like, oh, I'm going to write about it, and it was something political, and
Yeah, and I
I
looked it
didn't.
up actually. It
Yeah.
was it was a group of Catholic activists. God, now it's gonna drive me crazy that I can't remember what the line was, but it's a group of Catholic activists who were killed. And so
Oh,
Billy
yes.
had a song that he wanted to write about these people, and Rod was like, "No, no, it's a new decade.
Yeah.
People are tired of all the politics." Well, here's the deal: we were still very much a part of the Vietnam War. We were heading into a tumultuous um we were heading into a tumultuous presidency with Nixon on the
Yes.
horizon. So that's really nice that you want to say, "Oh, let's just set that all aside." But the reality is it was still very much a part of the day-to-day lives of American people at that time. We were still very involved in the war. People were still very, very much involved in the civil rights movement. Um,
But
so you
if you
can
look at
say get rid of it, but it's still there.
if you look at the music, though, that was when the singer-songwriter came
It was
to
a
the
shift.
forefront. The songs, Bob Dylan, I think isn't he going through his gospel phase? Like, or I don't remember, but the the idea that music and our youth and our energy can change the world died. it died by then. They they'd already gone through Kent State. They'd already gone through Altamont. Already so many of the people they loved had died. Hendrix had died. Morrison these people were dying. So, I mean, I remember there was just that moment, and then it did become about, and also these people are now they're getting close to 30. So what they want to talk about as songwriters is changing.
Mhm.
And I mean, some of them, so I think it is really, I think he was right. I'm not saying that, and I think if you look at times that are really tumultuous now, sometimes it all is about escapism. In like the 30s, the escapism was reflected in the Busby Berkeley musicals,
Yeah,
now I think the escapism for what we are in right now is our obsession with Marvel movies and things like that. So I think music at this time was the thing that was doing that for people because
right.
they were just tired.
People were ready to escape it. Yeah.
So good line. I think is Karen saying Rod told me to wear low cut shirts. I told Rod to eat shit. I feel like Karen has so many great lines in the book, and I'm glad that we're keeping some of those. And then Rod's like, "Oh, if you really want to make it, man, you got to move to LA and
He
get with."
he was so like textbook,
I know.
like smart, like textbook smarmy,
Yes.
just what you would expect.
Which I kind of missed. I loved the way she wrote the character in the book of Rod because he was so like, I'm just a guy who manages a rock and roll band, and I kind of missed that character. But so we
But told
get,
them they gotta get to LA. You gotta get to
yeah,
LA.
and get work with producers like Teddy Price. So they throw the Teddy Price book, breadcrumb out there, and then they go, and then Camila and Billy discuss her going, and she's because they kind of like, yeah, we're gonna go to LA, and then she walks up and she's like, what are we doing? And she says, I just can't follow some boy across the country. I have a job, I'm going to school. And then she goes, closes the door and says, you still owe me that song, Billy Dunn. And then a really lovely scene, I think, between her and her mom,
You
and their
still owe me that song.
and yeah, and
Yeah.
then a lovely scene when her mom, they're talking, and they're talking Spanish. I liked that. And she's like, oh, family's the most important thing. You never turn your back on the family. You shouldn't leave. But she tells her mom, well, you did. So cut to the next day. It's raining. Guess who's loading the van? Eddie. He's stuck getting soaked loading the van, and
Poor Eddie.
Camila shows up, and Eddie gives her like, oh, okay, cool. How do we feel about Camila's choice here?
I mean, she's meant to be 18, 19 years old, right?
Yeah,
She tried to be logical. She tried to make it smart, move and say, I'm going to stay here for my school and I'm going to stay here because this is where my life is. But the reality was she was an 18, 19-year-old young girl who was madly in love and could not picture a day without this amazing human being in her life. And so she just couldn't imagine living without him.
yeah,
So she went.
yeah, yeah,
But it 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 also helps to it helps with the renaming of the band
yeah.
since we are down a
A whole character.
since we are down a whole character. um it it helps them with renaming the band,
Okay.
so she had to go.
So then Daisy hears her song on the radio. We cut to her. She's on the radio at the gas station. She hears Stumbled on Sublime. She's not happy with that. They were at a
What was that even
restaurant.
supposed to be? I mean, I couldn't even tell what
Oh,
the phrasing of that song made no sense when he was singing it.
no, he's terrible.
The worst.
The worst. And then
And she has her hoop earrings on.
yeah, yeah, she's got those hoop earrings on. And then she's at a restaurant, and she's talking, and honestly, this is really messed up. And he says, she talks about how she has this thing called the up and down. And the up and down is because in the morning she has to take bennies so she can, get going, but that makes her too jacked up. So then drinks champagne, and she calls it an up and down. And the guy that she's with says, ooh, I love that. I'm going to use that in one of my books or one of my scripts. And then we have a pivotal moment where she says, "What made you think I'm not going to use that in something someday? Don't be." And he says, "Don't be cross. You can be my muse." And I'm like, who says cross? That was weird. And she says, "I'm not interested in being your muse. I'm not the muse. I'm the somebody."
The whole no need to be cross.
Oh,
Calm
yes.
down. You sound crazy. You're
Yes.
being irrational.
Yes.
We don't say
Yes.
those things to men.
No.
We only say those things to women,
Yeah.
which is a button pusher for me. A
Well,
huge
I
button
mean,
pusher for
just
me.
not, and no apology. Like, no, like, oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I should have thought of that. Yeah. But no, what she's there for is to be pretty and support him, and
Yes.
I mean, I would say, yeah, so like it's just an,
Because
and honest,
we were not completely, we were not, well, we're still not, we weren't even starting into the evolvement of, you know, the ERA and women going out into the workforce and
no,
crazy things like, being able to sign a contract as a woman, get a credit card as a woman,
exactly.
like so they were still very much ornamental representations of the success of their man.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
their success or them as a they were just like an ornament to once again for a man to show his level of success.
Well, and that's why you think whatever we do to celebrate them, and we celebrate them a lot, but we need to celebrate them anymore, are the women who wrote songs, had their voices beyond just Carole King, beyond, I'm talking about Loretta Lynn, and Dolly Parton, and people who are like, I'm not just a muse, I'm something,
Mm-hmm.
and to be seen. So that is, and to me, that is the whole point of Daisy Jones, like, is the fact that when she says, I'm not interested in being your muse, I'm the somebody.
Mm-hmm. I'm the
And
somebody.
yeah, and I think, even like, even for us in our generation, like, I feel like the women that we did have, I didn't appreciate enough. The women who I don't think I
Because there were too
appreciated.
few of them.
And as we've talked about before, anything that women like, obviously, we've got to shit on. So as much as the Alanis Morissette or Courtney Love, how they basically said, well, Courtney Love didn't actually write those songs. She did, like, Kurt Cobain wrote those for her. And like, come on. The idea of the way they treated Yoko Ono. And it's like, she was already her own thing and an important part of the art world. Like,
But because she wasn't a part of the pop culture world,
right.
therefore she
And
was irrelevant.
because she's Asian,
Yeah.
you know,
She
so
was she wasn't a part of popular culture, but she was very much a part of a culture that middle America did not know about. We didn't know about. And probably even the West Coast did not know
no,
about.
she's an incredibly important artist. That's
But
why
yet
he
we have
met
to
her,
shit on
because
her.
she was at a really important gallery show. That's how he met her. So anyway, I think that this idea of I'm the somebody, especially for, I just like, yeah, that's the whole point. It's a really important scene. And I think they did a really good job with it, because I think it's so important. And I like the little thing of her in her Mercedes, which is a part of her. It still shows her privilege. She's still a little rich girl. She got
Yes.
Mercedes.
Yes, that Mercedes. Oh God.
Nice.
280
And
SL.
then the line she says, 1997, Daisy says, no matter how confident you pretend to be, if enough people call you shit, you believe them. And then we see her she'd walked by this bar earlier. We see her walk into this bar and she sings, By Myself.
So many great lines in that
Yes.
song. And again, this goes back to we need a soundtrack that's not just the Aurora album. We
Yeah.
need everything else because this
So,
song has so many great lines.
and then we cut to, and she's happy with herself as she sings it. And
Yeah, because I
we
think
linger on that a long time. And I think it's a really good performance by Riley. I think they do I like the way they filmed it. I like the empty bar. It looked like a bar during the day that you go into. And I like how when you come out, you're like, oh, it's still daytime, you know?
Yeah. But I think this is the point where she finally decided that, yeah, she was a singer. Because
Yeah.
again, we go back to the scene where she told Simone, I'm not a singer.
Mm-hmm.
And, she allowed Wyatt to take from her.
Yep.
And I'm not going to be somebody's muse. I'm the somebody. This is that moment where she finally connects all those things that she said to her heart and
Yep.
to her mind, and now sees that she truly is the somebody, or she could be the somebody, and
And
finds
then
her own voice.
and then we go to Carole King's I Feel the Earth Move, which is such a great song. And we see her walking out of the bar, and then we see
The van
the
coming
van
up the
coming,
strip.
and they're implying that maybe Billy sees her and smiles at her, or
I'm
inspired her
trying to
go.
decide.
I
I'm
feel
trying
like
to
it was
just
kind of like that, like, I don't know, when you kind of accidentally make eye contact with somebody when you're driving,
sure.
and also like, oh wow, that girl's so California looking, you know?
Yeah, but
I
something in his face,
Yeah,
like like there's a moment, and it's fleeting. It's really fast, but
right.
there's something in his face that changes. He sees something, and for me, I saw a moment of panic.
Really?
Yeah,
A fear, maybe?
I saw a moment of panic, but then he completely. So I don't know what it was.
Well, I
Maybe
mean,
I
and
need to
also,
rewatch it
I
again.
would also say that it's also Amazon, whoever's like the person giving notes from the network going, we can't have them not be in a scene together for the whole first episode.
Right. Probably.
So,
Probably so.
okay. So that at the end, there's a fleeting glance, and we don't know exactly what that means, but that closes out episode 1. And we thought that we would probably be able to fit 2 episodes into an hour, but apparently we can't because we like to talk. So we're gonna do
We like to talk.
we like to
We
talk.
we like to hear ourselves speak.
Yes, we do.
It's
And
because we have great things to say. We're just really
I hope
in-depth kind of
people think
people.
so. I hope people think so. I mean, I just go back to, if nothing else, you and I can look back on this whenever hopefully we're 70 and be like, we were really big goofballs when we were 50.
We hadn't really grown up that much, had we?
Yeah, so we'll do episode 2 next week.
Sure. Or
And
maybe if we can squeeze it in earlier and drop
yeah,
another episode this week, we might try that. Who
yeah.
knows? But
But we will try to get that going. And I really want to get past these first 3 episodes because I've been not watching it because I don't want it to taint what I'm talking about. So I think, but the best thing to do is for us to stop here and just remind us, Rachel, where are we on the
okay.
socials?
So follow us on Instagram at Nobody's Muses. There's no apostrophe in there. It's just Nobody's Muses. NOBODYSMUSES. Nobody's Muses. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube. Nobody's Muses.
Yep.
Email is also nobodysmuses@gmail.com.
Yes, and please, I would love to get emails on thoughts, what you guys think, if we've missed something about the songs that you've noticed, especially if you're a book reader, things that your thoughts on the differences. Love to hear them.
Yeah, yeah. But give us a follow on Instagram. We're going to be putting more and more content out there as we
Get through
continue to record. Yeah.
get through these shows. I mean, look how long we took on just one episode. So yeah, so we will see you in hopefully for sure a week.
Oh,
But
and
if
don't
not,
forget to like and subscribe on any of your favorite podcasting platforms.
yes.
Be sure that you are checking us out. You can find us anywhere you listen to a podcast.
Yes.
But hit that follow button on those. If you feel so inclined to leave a review, great. If you don't, just hit the like button so we know people are out there paying attention.
Yes.
And we'll keep doing our thing.
Yeah. And even if no one watches it, we're still gonna do it. So but I think it's worth it. It's a
I think so
conversation that
too.
we want to be, and I would love to have more people be a part of the conversation.
Excellent. Me
So,
too.
all right.
All right.
All right. Let's hit
Thanks
the
for joining
music.
us.
Hit the music.
Hit the music.
Bye.